The champagne glass shattered. The champagne understand why everyone in the ballroom had suddenly gone silent. A second earlier, all in all saw her yath, with a small velvet ring box hidden inside his jacket, rehearsing the words he had spent 3 sleepless nights trying to perfect, ally in laws. Walked in her flant to the engagement banquet holding another man's arm, a Harroding man, Victor Harrington, the only son of Harrington Capital's chairman, Prass. The kind of man who wore a watch worth more than Ethan's apartment, drove a limited edition supercar, and treated million-dollar investments like loose change. Jessica Moore looked radiant beside him. Her red evening dress sparkled beneath the lights, and the diamond necklace resting against her collarbone was definitely not something Ethan had ever bought her. D. Host. Victor glanced at Ethan, at a waiter who had forgotten his order. Jessica didn't even seem embarrassed. She simply stopped several feet away and sighed. A speen. Frussauses. Those words hit harder than a slap. Ethan slowly removed his hand from inside his jacket, the ring box. Tell me what. Jessica's eyes flickered toward the people watching them. Most were executives from Ardent Technologies, where she worked as a marketing manager. Some recognized Ethan. They knew him as Jessica's ordinary boyfriend, lie engineer. A freelance software family, no luxury car, and apparently no future worthy of discussion. Jessica lifted her chin. Victor and I are together now. Unless it's Sal. For a moment, Ethan thought he had misunderstood. 4 years. They had survived cheap apartments, instant noodles, unpaid internships, and winters when Ethan secretly took extra programming jobs so Jessica could afford professional clothes for interviews. I'm lost. Ethan had celebrated harder than she did. When she received her first promotion, he spent almost everything he had saved that month to take her somewhere beautiful. When she cried from workplace pressure, he stayed awake until sunrise listening to her. Ethan had planned to propose. Instead, she had brought another man. Victor smiled. Don't make this difficult. Ethan ignored him. He looked only at Jessica. How long? Jessica hesitated. Victor answered for her. Something inside Ethan became strangely quiet. 3 months. I had wait 3 months. She was working overtime. 3 months of canceled dinners. 3 months of unanswered messages. And Stown lost. While she was probably sitting beside Victor. In restaurants. Ethan couldn't afford. Jessica crossed her arms. Ethan, you're a good person. The South lost. There it was. The sentence she had probably practiced. Her voice became firmer as she continued. I'm almost 30. I can't keep waiting for you to figure out your life. Russ amused this, you can't. Several people exchanged uncomfortable glances. Victor, however, looked amused. Figure out his life. Jessica had no idea. Frushable sauces. Ethan had been quietly building an artificial intelligence architecture under a private development name. He had never told Jessica how valuable it had become because he wanted to surprise her. After securing the final patents, and headed in half in South and lost. Only yesterday, an international investment group had offered $70 million for partial rights to the technology. Ethan had rejected them. He believed the platform could become something much larger. I howled sound in the woman standing of him. Had chosen tonight to abandon him. Because she believed he was poor. Victor stepped closer. I've already arranged for Jessica to become Deputy Director of Marketing next quarter. Pound and smile. That announcement. A few employees looked surprised. Jessica couldn't hide her proud smile. I'm lost. This wasn't simply romance. It was ambition wrapped in romance. Had traded 4 years for a promotion. Ethan nodded slowly. So that's your decision? By his calmness. She had probably expected him to beg. Maybe cry. boss. Maybe embarrass himself in front of everyone and prove that leaving him had been the correct decision. Instead, Ethan simply reached inside his jacket. Jessica's expression briefly softened when she saw the velvet box. All with little to show was South. For half a second, guilt appeared in her eyes. Victor noticed it too, and a little to show for it. Ethan opened the box. Inside rested a simple but elegant diamond ring and Heisnet. Spent months choosing it. He removed the ring, Rustum Sandloth, then calmly dropped it into a nearby glass of champagne. Several guests gasped. The diamond disappeared beneath the golden bubbles. Loss changed. Ethan, you made your choice, box. So I'll respect it. Victor laughed. At least, you understand your position. Ethan looked at him for the first time. There was no anger in his eyes. Understanden, lost. Ethan smiled faintly. I understand it perfectly. And the Nal em Sama. Tit exit. Behind him, whispers immediately began spreading. Jessica clenched her fists. His reaction wasn't what she wanted. She wanted devastation. She wanted confirmation that Ethan had lost the greatest thing in his life. Forget him. Instead, Victor placed a hand around her waist, asked, forget him, across the city. Jessica nodded, until he disappeared through the ballroom doors. Outside, rain was falling across the city, 100 canopy, and finally released the breath he had been holding. Pain arrived slowly. Not dramatic pain, homeward, south, something colder. 4 years had vanished in less than 5 minutes. His phone Brady ignored it. Then he noticed the caller, Daniel Reeves, managing partner of Northbridge Ventures, one of the investors who had been trying to acquire Ethan's technology. Daniel's excited voice exploded to the phone. Ethan, thank God. I am San. I was busy. Whatever you're doing, forget it. Brach and Nor. The valuation reviewing your architecture. Ethan looked at the rain and rised insane. Daniel paused. 300 million. Telman loss. Change. Daniel continued rapidly, and that's conservative. Inventions. We're talking about $1 billion platform. $1 billion. Minutes earlier, Jessica had told him he had no future. I with little, 'twas almost cruel. Daniel kept talking. We also received interest from Ardent Technologies. Private meeting. Ethan frowned. Ardent? Pawn's company. Asked. Yes. Apparently, their entire expansion strategy depends on acquiring an advanced predictive system, and yours is years ahead of anything they've tested. Rust and lost. Then Daniel added something unexpected. The CEO personally requested you. Ethan knew the name. Everyone in the business world did. Victoria Sinclair, a lost. Founder and Chief Executive Officer of Ardent Technologies, one of the youngest self-made billionaires in the country. I won't be Einhorst. Souse. Because competitors, who underestimated hers, usually disappeared from the market within a year. Jessica had mentioned Victoria countless times, always with a strange combination of admiration and fear. Jessica's banquet was upstairs. Tell them I'll meet. Tell them I'll meet. Possum loud. Perfect. Tomorrow morning. Warcat. The call ended. For the first time that night, he smiled. Hassan and morning. Jessica arrived, expecting celebration. Victor had promised that his father's influence would secure her promotion. She entered the executive floor, carrying an expensive handbag Victor had given her, and immediately noticed something strange. Itational ass. Conference in force. Assistants looked terrified. The chief financial officer nearly collided with her while carrying a stack of documents. All approached one of her colleagues. What's happening? The woman lowered her voice. The CEO canceled everything. Why? Some technology developer is coming. For frowned. Just technology developer? Apparently his platform could transform the entire company. The speed, Firth woman leaned closer. I heard the board is willing to offer hundreds of millions for a strategic partnership. Jessica's eyes widened. Hun lost. Before she could ask another question, the elevator doors opened. A procession of executives stepped out first. Sinclair, the atmosphere changed instantly. Victoria wore a black, tailored suit and walked with the effortless authority of someone who never needed to raise her voice. Poor femme. She was strikingly beautiful. But there was nothing soft about her presence. Her dark hair was tied neatly behind her, and her calm eyes seemed capable of calculating everyone's value within seconds. Jessica immediately straightened. Victor's family treated Victoria Sinclair carefully. Behind was not Victoria, walked Daniel O'Shreves, and behind Daniel, Jessica stopped breathing. Ethan. For several seconds. Her mind refused to accept what her eyes were showing her. Simple charcoal suit. No luxury watch. No flashy accessories. Yet Daniel Tal Reeves was speaking to him with obvious respect. More shocking, Victoria Sinclair was listening. Jessica's face turned pale. Their eyes met. He showed no surprise. He simply continued walking. Sout stepped forward instinctively. Ethan? Victoria stopped. Every executive around her stopped as well. Daniel looked confused. You two know each other? First at. We used to. Sal, a touchlight. The words were polite, that somehow humiliated her more. Victoria's eyes moved from Ethan to Jessica. Ardenians A. Sassed. I sassed, instead of asking questions. She continued toward the boardroom. Shall we? Mr. Cole. At ardent address, Ethan so formally. She watched him enter the boardroom beside the CEO. Her heartbeat became irregular, postular, and then locks. She rushed toward her manager. Who exactly is he? Her manager stared at her. You don't know? Jessica felt cold. Icarus. He's the architect behind Helix. Jessica said nothing. The name meant everything. Helix had become a legend among technology investors during the past several months. Animating is scum for it. An adaptive artificial intelligence framework capable of analyzing supply chains, consumer behavior, logistics, cybersecurity risks, and market movement simultaneously. Some analysts believed it could make traditional enterprise software obsolete. But the creator had remained anonymous, a Jessica's. The glass wall of the boardroom. Ethan was sitting directly across from Victoria Sinclair, boyfriend, the man she had called unsuccessful, the man she had abandoned for money, arrogance, was currently negotiating a deal worth hundreds of millions. Inside the room, Victoria studied Ethan carefully. She had expected arrogance. I know her. Asked, possessed too much of it. Ethan seemed different, slid a proposal across the table. 200 million for 25% ownership of Helix. Ethan didn't touch the document. Too low, uncomfortably. Nobody spoke to Victoria Sinclair's. That casually. Victoria wasn't offended. Instead, something resembling interest appeared in her eyes. What would you consider reasonable? You're not buying software. Buying. You're buying an advantage your competitors won't be able to reproduce. Victoria's lips curved slightly. For the next hour, Ethan dismantled every assumption the board had made. He explained how Helix could reduce logistics losses, Rustoth, how it could identify consumer demand before traditional forecasting models, how it could detect internal fraud patterns, how integrating Helix across Ardent's infrastructure could cut operational costs by nearly a third. By the time he finished, the room was silent. Victoria closed the proposal. 500 million valuation. Better. Ethan remained calm. Better. Bought. Exclusive. Integration rights for 18 months. No. Victoria's eyes narrowed. Because exclusivity makes you comfortable. A few executives looked horrified. Competition makes you efficient. Victoria stared at him. Off. Then she laughed. It was the first time most people in that room had ever heard her do so. Outside the glass wall, Jessica watched the entire exchange. I dine. Each seconds, and then lost. Each second, then Victor arrived. He walked onto the executive floor carrying coffee and immediately approached Jessica. Why aren't you downstairs? Jessica barely heard him. Victor followed her gaze. His expression changed when he recognized Ethan. What is he doing here? Jessica whispered the answer. Victor frowned. What? Town is sauna. Victor's face. Impossible. My son-in-laws. Ethan emerged beside Victoria. Daniel followed, and Victor immediately smiled. Souse. Victoria. The Harrington Partnership. Now, Salta. Victoria looked at him with professional indifference. Not today. By Victor's smile stiffened, Victoria turned toward Ethan. I'd like to speak privately before you leave. Victoria's personal office. Jealousy struck harder than she expected. She told herself it was because of the business deal. I shoning nothing else. Victoria closed the door. For several seconds, she simply looked at Ethan, surprised him. I know what happened last night. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Victoria continued. Jessica Moore is my employee. Victor Harrington has been using his father's business relationship with Ardent to pressure several departments. Ethan's expression remained neutral. If you're worried this affects negotiations, it doesn't. I'm not worried. About what? I'm curious. About what? Past in loss. Spent 4 years allowing people to believe he was ordinary. Ethan smiled faintly. I didn't think love required a financial report. Big Treshhouse tie. For the first time, the famous Ice Queen's expression softened. Apparently you were wrong. A silence passed between them. Then, Victoria opened a drawer and removed a thin folder, placed it on the desk. Ethan glanced at it. This isn't another acquisition proposal, is it? Paya. No. Something about her demeanor changed. Loss and lost. In her place was a woman making a decision she had clearly considered carefully. My grandfather controls the Sinclair family trust. Hein waited. According to the trust agreement, if I remain unmarried when I turn 32, voting control over a significant portion of Ardent transfers temporarily to my uncle, desperately. And your uncle wants your position. Desperately. Massaus. Victoria is in 3 months. Ethan opened it. The first page was a marriage agreement. He looked up. Victoria Sinclair met his eyes without hesitation. Bahastamerlas. She continued calmly, a need and lie more. Regret ever believing you were beneath her. A faint smile appeared on Victoria's lips. So, Ethan Cole, as a folded her hands on the desk. Will you marry me? It's outside the office. Jessica stood frozen near the partially opened hallway door, having heard every single word. Toss and loss. For several seconds, Ethan said nothing. Victoria had just offered him marriage with the same calm expression she used while negotiating a $500 million technology deal. Most men would have thought she was joking. He looked down at the agreement. Again. The document was brutally precise. 3-month and south period. 1 year, contractual marriage, separate finances, public cooperation when required. No interference in personal business unless both parties agreed. Haudesenhoutry. Either side could terminate the arrangement. Had been satisfied. Victoria had even included an exit clause. guaranteeing Ethan full independence from the Sinclair family after the contract ended. He flipped through several pages. I had this prepared before today. Yes. So I wasn't your first candidate. It came too quickly. Ethan looked up. Hometown for it. I considered several candidates and rejected them? Loss. Why? Victoria leaned back in her chair. I counted it. One wanted access to my company. Concern. One wanted access to my money. Also predictable. Another thought marrying me meant he could control me. Ethan almost laughed. Did that conversation end? He no longer does business with Ardent. Ethan paused. Ominous. It was efficient. Despite everything that had happened to him in the last 24 hours, Ethan felt the corner of his mouth lift. I'll. Victoria noticed. It was subtle, but she noticed. She had studied him throughout the morning meeting. He did not flatter powerful people. He did not become nervous when challenged. He never raised his voice or rushed to prove himself. Most importantly, when $500 million entered the conversation, his expression barely changed. That interested her more than the technology itself. All did themselves around money. Ethan had revealed almost nothing. Victoria folded her hands. You're different. That's not an explanation. It is part of one. Paused. Below them, the city stretched beneath the tower like circuitry carved from steel and glass. My family has spent years trying to turn my marriage into an acquisition. Her voice was colder now. Every man introduced to me came with a surname, a company, a political connection, or a hidden demand. She glanced back. Hath. Ethan waited. Victoria said quietly, no reason to need me. That caught his attention. She continued. That you could walk away from this company today and still become wealthy. I don't enter negotiations blind. You researched me personally? Of course. Ethan looked amused. Should I be worried? A real laugh this time. Probably. A real laugh. Victoria stared at him for half a second longer than necessary. Then she looked away. Outside the office, Jessica's nails were digging into her palms. She had heard enough. Marry me. The words kept repeating inside her head. I lost Victoria Sinclair, her CEO. One of the wealthiest, most powerful women in the country had just asked Ethan South her. The same Ethan Jessica had discarded less than 24 hours earlier because he couldn't provide the future she wanted. Her chest tightened. A business in the shower. This couldn't be happening. There had to be some misunderstanding. A business arrangement, a joke, anything. She moved closer to the door. A hand nearly screamed. Victor stood behind her, thought in some sauce, and lied. She immediately pulled him away from the office. Keep your voice down. Victor frowned. Lot. Why are you listening at the door? Jessica's expression was strange enough that his irritation turned into suspicion and loss. What happened? She hesitated, then whispered. Victoria asked Ethan to marry her. Disor. For 2 seconds, nothing registered. Then he laughed. All that's ridiculous, I heard her. His laughter disappeared. Pause it. And what exactly did she say? Victor's face darkened with every sentence. The Sinclair trust. Ethan, as the chosen candidate, and the Salma Dow. Victor looked toward Victoria's office. His jaw tightened. He had already disliked Ethan when he believed him to be an insignificant former boyfriend. Consort. But an insignificant man could be ignored. A man controlling revolutionary technology and potentially marrying Victoria Sinclair was something else entirely. That combination could threaten the Harrington family for Seychelles. Victor's father had spurning capital's influence over ardent technologies. If Ethan became Victoria's husband, even temporarily, those plans could collapse overnight. Victor's eyes narrowed. Loss. Jessica looked at him. What do you mean? from Stast. How are you going to stop it? Victor smiled coldly. Jessica said nothing. But for the first time since last night, she felt afraid. Inside the office, Ethan closed the contract. There's one problem. Victoria turned. Only now. Go ahead. You said part of your reason for choosing me is that I don't need your money. Correct. Then revenge can't be another reason. Honed and lost. Victoria, an eyebrow, Ethan continued. I don't need to marry you to make Jessica regret anything. A flicker of surprise crossed his face. You're not angry? I am. Then why not use it? Ethan stood. Because building my life around someone else's regret means they still control part of it. The statement landed somewhere deeper than Ethan realized. For years, she had built much of her identity around defeating the relatives who believed she was too young, too female, too independent to control the Sinclair empire. But she had winning against them become another form of living for them? Ethan slipped the contract back onto the desk. If I may marry you, it will because the arrangement benefits both of us. Victoria studied him. Then name your terms. Remains mine. Agreed. No Sinclair member gets influence over my company. Lossai in South. If someone business because of this marriage, Ardent treats that as an attack on our alliance. Agreed. And I don't the obedient, sharpened one. Good. She stepped closer. They were only a few feet apart now. And your final condition. Ethan looked directly at her. No lies between us. Bought and lot. Slightly. He noticed. It lasted less than a second. And a frost. Sow. Then marry someone else. Highness ten south. Highness seer south. Silence filled the office. Victoria, she had survived corporate warfare by controlling information. Parmes. Secret truths were shields. Half-complete honesty was practically an operational weakness. The door. Agreed. He stopped. A hometown and no lies. Ethan turned back. Works both ways. I do. He nodded. Or the proposal. Victoria frowned. Consider? Send, rands, and loss. You didn't expect an immediate. I expected efficiency. Marriage seems like the wrong category for that. It would be a contract. Exactly. Which is why I'll read every page. Homely smiled. Tomorrow, I want your answer. Ethan opened the door. None whatsoever. He stepped into the hallway. By Hondret, by Howard. Too late. Ethan saw her. Victor stood side by side. For one awkward sound moment, all four of them occupied the same corridor. Victoria came out behind Ethan. Miss Sinclair. Victoria, Jessica. Her tone revealed nothing. Amor San Rian. Victor stepped forward. Victoria, perhaps we should talk about the Harrington partnership. Schedule it with my office. We've known each other too long for that. Victoria's expression cooled, which is exactly why you should know better than to ambush me outside my office. Ost. Ethan almost smiled. Victoria turned toward Ethan. Dan and then lost. Wherever you're going. Not necessary. Security will escort you. That sounds dramatic. It is dramatic. Her gaze briefly shifted toward Victor. Had already created enemies. He nodded. Fine. As Ethan walked toward the elevator, Jessica finally spoke. Ethan. Bossed. Victor looked irritated. Victoria remained silent. Approached him. Can we talk? Ethan looked at her calmly. We're talking. Privately. I don't think there's anything private left between us. Her face went pale. The surrounding were pretending not to listen. They were failing him spectacularly. In South. Jessica lowered voice. I didn't know. Ethan almost laughed at the simplicity of those three words. Home Helix. There it was. Not I hurt you. Not I'm sorry. I'm lost. I didn't know you were valuable. Ethan's expression became colder. So if you'd known, You would have stayed? Jessica froze. He had exposed the truth too quickly. I didn't mean it like that. Did you mean it? She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. They can't. Ethan nodded. Jessica's eyes began to redden. Out the center. Ethan, 4 years can't just disappear. You made them disappear. Last night. Victor stepped forward. Granzing. Enough. Ethan looked at him. Victor's voice carried the confidence of someone accustomed to intimidation. Except, Ethan's face remained calm. Victor frowned. Then stopped trying to interfere. I haven't spoken to her since she dumped me. A few nearby employees almost laughed. Victor noticed. A Helen and hat. His face darkened. Because someone offered money for your software. Ethan stared at him and lost Lostren. You're standing in someone else's company, talking about someone else's money, while wearing a position provided by your father's name. Victor's expression twisted. Ethan continued softly. Offer any my nast. Psst. The hallway went completely silent. Jessica's stomach dropped. Victor's face turned red. No one spoke to him like that. Not publicly. Not in front of employees. He stepped closer. You have no idea who you're dealing with. Victoria's voice cut through the hallway. He knows exactly who he's dealing with. Victor stopped. Paulers and Fiend Eye stepped. Beside Ethan, her expression was ice. And if you threaten my strategic partner again inside my headquarters, Harrington Capital will lose every active negotiation with Ardent before you reach the lobby. Victor stared at her. You'd damage a billion-dollar relationship over him? Victoria didn't hesitate. Try me, Sal. Math. That was the moment the balance shifted. Everyone watching understood it. Rustadry shows enter Sal. Rustry sent some cern fairly. Today, one of the most powerful CEOs in the country had publicly chosen his side over the Harrington family. Victor understood too. Across his face. He forced a smile. You're overreacting. I'm documenting a pattern. No. Lest. Ethan entered, smile vanished. Before the doors closed, he looked at Jessica one last time, and she seemed somehow uncertain and halset. The confidence she had besorn beside Victite had disappeared. The doors closed. Jessica stood motionless, intowness. A company notification. She opened it. Her blood went cold. The promotion Victor had promised was under review. A second message arrived. Sether loss. Possible conflict of interest investigation involving external influence on internal personnel decisions. Jessica slowly looked at Victor. Loss. Victor frowned. What? My promotion. What about it? They're investigating it. And a lot. His face changed. Jessica suddenly remembered something. Victor had promised her advancement inside a company he didn't own. Powerful. Now it looked different. Dangerous. Dabble, did you tell the board? She asked. Victor's irritation returned. Ost has influence. That's what they're investigating. What if I lose my job? Victor looked at her as though the concern annoyed him. And if I do, I'll get you another one. A seer for it. Another job, another favor. And then Lund North. Another dependency. For the first time, she began to understand the difference between Ethan and Victor. Ethan had spent years helping her become stronger. Other even tasked, Hintown in her Southden. Required her, she hated the thought immediately. But she hated herself more for thinking about Ethan, now that she knew what he was worth. Paul Santone for it. It looked exactly as it had. Yesterday. Small kitchen. Second on the couch. 2 monitors on the stacks. Stacks of technical notebooks. Frustrated temporary. She never understood that Ethan had intentionally lived below his means because nearly everything he earned went back into Helix. He sat at the desk and in loss. Frutches, investors, reporters, technology, firms, souse. 6 months ago, One message came from an unfamiliar number, by Hess Alanang. On Victoria Sinclair's newest acquisition. Ethan stared at it. Another message arrived. Be careful who you marry. No signature. He immediately forwarded both to Daniel, all with little to show for it. Then he opened Victoria's contract. He had taken a digital copy. Something about the anonymous message bothered him. Biter. Victor. Pawn the recircle. Team. That was a small circle. His phone rang. Dan lost. That was fast. Straighter. Yes. What did yours say? Victoria paused. Loss. Your family? And Ethan's expression hardened. Your family? Possibly. Possible. For someone else? More likely than I'd prefer. Ethan stood and walked toward the window. You expected resistance. I expected political resistance. Not threats. Her voice lowered. My uncle arrived in the city this afternoon. Frusnishiri. If you don't marry, Richard Sinclair. Convenient timing. Rustem Sals. Ethan remained silent. Victoria continued. Honras. He remembered the condition he had demanded. No lies. I'm listening. My uncle doesn't merely want temporary voting rights. What does he want? Ardent. Ethan frowned. Victoria's voice became colder. I stole the company from him. Did you? No. But 12 years ago. But Ardent was almost bankrupt. She paused. My father was dying. Richard expected to inherit operational control. I found outside financing, restructured the company, removed 3 corrupt directors, and forced him off the board. So this isn't about a trust. No. It's a war, yes. He looked down at the city. And you're asking me to marry into the middle of it. I am. That's an important detail. Anything else? Victoria was silent. Hot. Ethan, no lies. Talon lost. Richard has already tried to destroy 2 people I considered marrying. That changed everything. Fine lost. How? One man's company suddenly faced regulatory investigations after anonymous complaints for Stonor. And the other received evidences of an old financial crime committed by his father. Were the accusations true? Doesn't invent weakness. He finds them. Asked. Ethan walked back toward his desk. That's useful. Victoria sounded surprised. Hestes lost. Useful? I'd rather know what weapon they prefer. For a moment she said nothing. Haratas. You really aren't afraid of him. I haven't met him. I'll decide afterward. You will. A faint laugh came through the phone. Ethan sat down. I'll give you my answer tomorrow. Good night, Ethan. Victoria. Good night. The call ended. Across town, Victoria remained standing alone in her penthouse office. Frust House. She stared at the dark screen. Her entered carrying documents. You told him everything? And he didn't run? No. Maya smiled. That's inconvenient. Victoria looked at her and lost. You might actually like him. Victoria's stare could have frozen steel. Olmero. I'll pretend I didn't say that. You should. Of the Noral. Then stopped. Richard requested dinner tomorrow. I changed. With me? No. Maya with Ethan. Victoria slowly stood. Across the city, another phone began ringing. Ethan looked at the unknown number. He almost ignored it. Pinebest. Mr. Deep male voice spoke. Hommel. Ethan said nothing. My name is Richard Sinclair. The voice was calm. Polished. Dangerously friendly. Einen Naus Enino. Something that belongs to my family. Ethan leaned back, and I believe she can make her own decisions. Quietly. Good. You're less boring than the others. And the others, the men Victoria thought she could use before you. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Continued. I'd like to invite you to dinner. Why? So I can make you a better offer. I'm listening. Richard's voice became colder. Walk away from Victoria. Sinclair. A pause. And I'll make you richer than marrying her ever could, Pie paused. For several seconds. Richard Sinclair had chosen his words carefully. Not threatened, not demanded, proffered, offered. That alone told Ethan more about the man than any corporate profile could. Du sound sauce. Because they wanted others to feel their power. Men like Richard didn't need to display it. They preferred making their victims believe surrender had been their own decision. Dashboard. Glowing across his monitor. How rich? Richard laughed softly, straight to the number. I like that. You called to make an offer. I'd in the loft. $200 million. Didn't change. Richard continued. Clean transfer. No equity. Other than one. I disappear from Victoria's life. Precisely. Back in his chair. That's expensive. My niece is expensive. Way to describe family. Victoria stopped behaving like family years ago. There was no hesitation in Richard's voice. That away. Why me? Paused. You already know why. I want to hear you say it. I fast. You're cautious. You're offering $200 million to someone you've never met. Floth, then humor me. The silence lasted longer this time. Finally, and Sinino. Finally, Richard spoke. Needed something from the Sinclair family. That made them controllable. I don't. Ethan's fingers stopped tapping the desk. Richard continued. Makes you dangerous. Not Helix. Not the money. By him. Richard understood. The same stood. Independence was power. If I refuse, I invite you to dinner anyway. I lets are vulgar. Richard's voice grew almost pleasant, and Hober for it. Demonstrations, the line went dead. Ethan stared at the phone. Then he smiled. Richard had made one mistake. He had expected the phrase to frighten him. Hall and lawn frustingfly. The man was worried. Ethan immediately called Victoria. On with little to show for it. She answered before the second ring. It wasn't a question. Rest. Silence. Then Victoria said, That's higher than I expected. Ethan raced at him to bribe me? I expected him to try. I mentioned that. I didn't know the amount. No lies. I didn't lies. You omitted. Those aren't technically the same thing. Careful. Victoria sighed. Careful. Fine. I should have told you. Better. What did you say? Did you accept dinner? He hung up before I answered. Victoria's voice hardened. Don't meet him alone. Planning to. Ethan. He wants a reaction. If I hide behind security before I've even met him, he gets one. This isn't about pride. Agreed. Then listen to me. Richard doesn't invite people to dinner because he's hungry. Ethan stood and began pacing slowly. You said he finds weaknesses. Yes. Then I want to know what he thinks mine is. Own loss. She understood the logic. She simply didn't like it. Take Maya. Your assistant? Former intelligence analyst. Ethan blinked. Your executive assistant is former intelligence? Seaman and Wuxtor agent. I was beginning to wonder why she looked like she could kill someone with a stapler. A brief laugh escaped Victoria. Lost, Ethan smiled. Then her voice softened. Be careful, Frost said, in the way she said it. Not CEO to strategic partner. Not contract bride to contract husband. A scene that more percent. Ethan noticed. He chose not to mention it. I will. This morning's technology's peaceful from the outside. Inside, war had already begun, and Helen lost. Jessica sat in a glass conference room, across from two internal compliance officers. On the table lay printed emails, promotion recommendations, and communications between Victor Harrington and a member of Ardent's regional board. The senior investigator adjusted his glasses, by farm inserting the Safa. Miss Moore, aware Mr. Harrington, contacted Director Lambert regarding your promotion? Wallowed. Did Mr. Harrington out. Harrington ever tell you he could influence your career advancement? She remembered the night. Victor had taken her to dinner. His smile, odd intoning hers, his hand, the casual promise that she would never have to fight for another promotion again. No, the investigator looked at her. Jessica's heart pounded. She changed her answer. Was soused. Family. Influence. Did you encourage him? No. That part was true. But she hadn't asked him to contact anyone. But she had enjoyed believing he could. The investigator slid another page across the table. Our salutation. Mr. Harrington stating that continued cooperation between Harrington Capital and Ardent would be easier if certain employees received proper recognition. Jessica felt sick. I didn't know. I didn't know. Our investigator nodded. As south. The meeting ended 20 minutes later. Promotion and hat. Jessica walked into with trembling legs. Her promotion was gone. Maybe temporarily. Larnoi. Maybe permanently. Worst. Employees who once congratulated her now whispered when she passed. Her phone buzzed. Victor. She answered immediately. What did you do? He sounded annoyed. Good morning to you too. So am I. Stop panicking. Pause. A pause. What messages? To Director Lambert. Victor's tone changed. That's confidential correspondence. They're investigating me. And they'll find nothing. You used your family's business relationship to pressure them. For Seiyotu. Victor laughed coldly. Potastans. You didn't complain when you thought you were getting the promotion. Jessica froze. The cruelty of the statement hit instantly. Victor. Don't suddenly pretend you were above it. I trusted you. No, Miles. You chose me because I could give you something Ethan couldn't. Jessica's face went white. Victor continued, as in Talmer. Because you discovered. Your ex-boyfriend is rich. The line went silent. Jessica couldn't respond. Was security. She had chosen status. Security. She had called it maturity. Maybe it had simply been greed wearing professional clothes. And impatient. Meet me tonight. Why? A mouse adds. Jessica's stomach tightened. What about him? About Helix. About Ethan. B became suspicious. What information? Habits? Friends? Anything useful? Jessica stared out through the tower windows. No. Victor laughed. Jessica, don't be stupid. Investigate him? I'm asking you to remember things. For what? Or stopped pretending. To make sure he doesn't become a problem. Jessica felt cold. I left her Saddam south. He becomes everyone's problem if he marries Victoria. There it was. For Sandring Hafor. The realization produced a strange feeling inside Jessica. She would have helping impossible. Today, it felt obvious. I'm not helping you hurt him. Don't forget who you're with. Jessica ended the call. After. Her hands timed since choosing Victor. She wondered whether she had stepped into something far darker than infidelity. Across town, Ethan entered the private dining floor of the Monarch Hotel, behind him. She wore a Chen walked 3 steps, business suit, and looked completely ordinary. That was probably intentional, quietly. Maya didn't look at him. Would knowing improve your evening? Probably. Then yes. Ethan almost to show laughed. Victoria wasn't exaggerating about you. Victoria rarely exaggerates. They reached the private dining room. Richard Sinclair was already waiting. He rose. Slowly. God. And hometown. Ethan immediately understood why so many executives feared him. Richard was in his late 50s, silver-haired, elegant, and warm-eyed. Nothing about him looked threatening. He smiled. Mr. Cole. Richard. Richard glanced at Maya. Victoria sent supervision. Insurance. Richard laughed. Still charming, for I took a seat near the wall. Ethan sat opposite Richard. Dinner began without business. Richard out software, architecture, universities, technology regulation. 20 minutes passed. No threats. No mention of Victoria. Then dessert arrived. Down and down. Jessica Moore. Ethan's gaze sharpened. Richard smiled. What about her? Frusty Hunter. Not anymore. People say that when they're wounded. I've met her. Sess, this more inside. When? Surprised him. She didn't tell you. We don't talk. Good. Richard took a sip of wine. She loves you. Ethan nearly laughed. You're wasting time. Richard Southtown remained. But she regrets losing you. I same. True. Though regret is often more useful. All with expression cooled. If you brought me here to discuss my ex-girlfriend, the dinner's over. Richard raised one finger. Why am I? Patience. He reached beside folder on the table. Ethan didn't touch it. Your weakness. Ethan stared at him. By Sinclair. Richard opened the folder. Ethan's mother leaving a grocery store. Howling Tao Ethan Latit. His younger sister university. His father outside a medical clinic. The air around Ethan changed instantly. Both hands. No one has been harmed. Became dangerous quiet. You had my family followed. I had them researched. Wrong answer. Richard smiled for the first time. Ethan saw the real man. I told you. I find weaknesses. Ethan looked at the photographs. Then back at Richard. After a dissound sound mats. Everyone has leverage. Victoria told me you don't invent vulnerabilities. She knows me well. Not well enough. Conrad. Richard's brow moved slightly. Ethan leaned forward. You showed me your method. Richard said nothing. You investigate families, finances, secrets, dependencies. Then you apply pressure at the weakest point. That's useful information. Richard smiled again for Samlate. You think knowing the blade prevents the cut? No. Ethan placed his phone on the table. Aber Hennelushing in Saus. But knowing, fall where you're not. Richard's eyes narrowed. Ethan tapped the screen. Maya's phone vibrated. So did Richard's. Then several phones outside the private room began ringing almost simultaneously. Richard slowly picked up his changed. A financial news alert had appeared. Pine and South. Sinclair Strategic Holdings exposed to undisclosed debt covenant risk following confidential lender reassessment. For the first time that evening, genuine surprise appeared on his face. What did you do? Nothing illegal. Ethan smiled faintly. Helix analyzes patterns. Ah. 3 lenders had requested immediate clarification regarding discrepancies in collateral reporting tied to Richard's private investment vehicle. My accounts. No. Public filings. Shipping records. Court registrations. Executive transactions. Palmis and Lar. Ethan tapped the table. Together they tell a story. She smiled pleasantly. He's good. Ethan's voice hardened. You. Ethan said nothing. Richard said nothing. Last night, Helix investigated yours. For the first time, Richard Sinclair looked angry. Ethan continued. Ah. Warning sound, outh. You hid leveraged exposure through 3 separate holding companies. Not illegal by itself. But one of those companies pledged overlapping assets to multiple lenders. Became stills. Ethan knew he'd hit the target. That's not supposed to be public. Private records. No. Lost. Ethan leaned back. You'd be surprised how much people reveal when they assume nobody will connect the pieces. Richard slowly closed the folder containing Ethan's family photographs. Everyone wants something. This educational. Ethan stood. You wanted a demonstration. Heaven sows. Loss. So did I. Behind the door. Richard spoke before Ethan could leave. If you marry Victoria, this becomes war. He turned. Richard expected hesitation. There was none. Ethan reached into his jacket. He removed the marriage contract Victoria had given him. Last day, already signed south. Lowered to the signature. Ethan placed the document on the table. Rush should prepare. Richard's face finally lost its polished calm. Ethan walked out, and Maya followed. She stared at him. You signed before dinner. You planned to show him. Yes. Only if he earned it. Victoria is going to love this. Ethan looked at her. Of course. Don't start. I'm not saying anything. The elevator doors opened. Victoria was standing in the lobby, home from ports. Ethan stopped. She hadn't told him she would be there, eyes searching his face. Are you all right? Fine. Richard? Tabbing how ended. Less fine. Victoria noticed the expression on Ethan's face, frustrated and lost Hammond. What happened? He handed her a digital copy of She Stared at It, an Helmloth. For several seconds, the woman famous for never losing control said absolutely nothing. Then she looked up. You signed. By Dean Thomas Sorrent. I did. You could have waited until tomorrow. I changed my mind. Why? Ethan glanced back toward the elevator. Brown as souse. A smile slowly appeared on Victoria Sinclair's face, not the diplomatic smile she used for investors. Loss. Not the cold smile she gave competitors. Something warmer. Something almost dangerous. Ben Sinclair. Then there's one thing left. What? Victoria removed a diamond ring from her. Ethan stared. You carry that around? Preparation. Of course you do. She held the ring out. We're announcing the engagement. Ethan raised an eyebrow. That fast? I mean, is Hal. Richard, by sunrise. She slid the ring onto his hand before he could object. Subtle. Ethan asked. The next morning, every screen inside Ardent Technologies displayed the same breaking headline. Victoria Sinclair, billionaire CEO of Ardent Technologies, announces engagement to Helix founder Ethan Cole. On the nod. Staring at the photograph beneath the headline, Victoria's hand rested around Ethan's arm. The engagement ring was clearly visible. Bye. Employees around Jessica erupted. Someone behind her said, Didn't Jessica used to date him? Another voice replied, She dumped him for Victor Harrington. Af Pertson laughed. That's got to hurt. Jessica's face burned. Ethan stepped out. Victoria was beside him. The entire lobby fell silent. Jessica couldn't move. Victoria reached for Ethan's hand. Cameras were present. There were none. She simply took it. And when Ethan looked down at her, he didn't pull away. Jessica felt something inside her collapse. Before she could stop herself, she stepped forward. Everyone turned. Victoria stopped. Helm Searer. Tears gathered in her eyes. I need to tell you something. I'll offer Matt. Victor arrived exact moment. His face was pale with fury. Jessica ignored him. I'm lying. She looked only at Ethan. Victor and his family are planning something against you. The lobby went silent, changed instantly. Jessica. She turned toward him. No, he stepped forward. You don't know what you're talking about. And Jessica's voice shook. You asked me for information about Ethan's family. His habits. Lost. Victoria's expression became ice. Victor froze. Home lost. Ethan watched him calmly. Then Jessica said the words that made Victor's face lose all color. Your father said Helix has to be destroyed before Ethan and Victoria get married. Indecision and loss. The silence at Ardent Technologies' lobby became suffocating. Victor Harrington stared at Jessica as though she had just driven a knife through his chest. Jessica stared back with trembling hands. That let Victor represented security. Now, surrounded by employees, executives, and the woman who controlled the company, she realized something far uglier. Victor had never treated her like a partner. Pawning some town asked. She had been useful. A connection to Ethan. A trophy stolen from someone he considered inferior. Become dangerous. Victor expected her to become a weapon. Victoria Sinclair stepped forward. Her hand remained wrapped around Ethan's. Repeat what you just said. Jessica swallowed. Victor asked me for information about Ethan, his routines. Anything that could be used against him. She's lying. Jessica flinched. Victoria didn't even look at him. Hesitated at. Then nodded. Jessica. Frost. You told me to delete them. Victor moved toward her. The motion was calm. Almost lazy. Sure stopped. Ethan said quietly, Don't. Victor looked at him with open hatred. Has nothing to do with you. Ethan almost smiled. You're discussing. Destroying my company. Jessica stared at him. So you admit it? Mistake instantly. The lobby erupted in whispers. Victoria raised one hand. She turned toward Maya Chen, who had appeared near the security desk. Secure the phone. Approach Jessica. Jessica handed it over willingly. Victor's eyes followed every movement. Private. I. Maya smiled. Then you should have chosen better words. All with little doubt his phone. I'm calling my lawyer. Victoria finally looked at him. Hast technologies. You should. Her voice was, as of this moment, Harrington Capital is suspended from every active negotiation with Ardent Technologies. Alan Loth. Victor went still. You can't do that. I just did. And partnership. Victoria's expression didn't change. What partnership? Crushed him harder than shouting ever could. Victor looked around. Everyone had heard it. The Harrington netted doors for him. It's south. Victoria had just closed one in front of hundreds of witnesses. He turned toward Ethan. Because of you. Ethan shook his head. No. For far as phone in Maya's hand. This is because of you. Victor clenched his fists. Abelin fanned. Then the elevator doors opened. Man in his early 60s emerged with 2 lawyers and 3 security personnel. Charles Harrington. There was Harrington Herringsoust. The whispers stopped immediately. Horror. Charles walked with confidence of someone accustomed to rooms rearranging themselves around him. He looked first at his son. Then, Jessica. Finally, Ethan. So you're Ethan Cole. So you're Charles Harrington. Victor looked stunned. Most people addressed his father as Chairman Harrington. Ethan didn't bother. Charles almost smiled. Hastened down. Victoria answered before Ethan could. Your son caused it. I laughed. Charles glanced at her. Vic, surely we can discuss this privately. No. Down lost. That answer surprised even him. Victoria continued. Your son attempted to obtain private information about my fiancée and discussed destroying technology currently under strategic negotiation with Ardent. Charles's gaze sharpened. My son is not responsible for careless made by a frightened employee. Jessica's face went pale. Victoria's voice turned colder. We have the messages. Charles looked at Jessica. Has Sanneltowns and Hennet. F. Hethan Lot. For the first time, he didn't need to threaten her. His stare did enough. At Ethan, don't look at her. Charles turned toward him. I Hendred's great. Ethan stepped beside Jessica. If you have something to say it to me? Charles studied him, smiled faintly. You're protective of the woman who betrayed you. Jessica's eyes flickered toward Ethan. Ethan didn't look at her. I'm protective of people being intimidated because someone thinks money makes him untouchable. Charles's smile disappeared. B.S. and Durno. Puts you on my level? No. Ethan's answer came instantly. Almost last. That I think assuming money creates levels is why your son became like this. Het and lost. Charles's face hardened. Victoria hid a smile. Awesome town. Jessica, she can answer for them. Lost. I lost. But whatever she did to me doesn't give you permission to use her as a target. Jessica lowered her eyes. Something painful twisted inside her chest. And Hainina Betas and Los Tauth was defending her. The man she had chosen, instead, was the reason she needed defending. Charles stepped closer. Hone, Mr. Cole. Ethan waited. Talent creates opportunities. Charles adjusted his cuff. Capital decides who survives them. Frustrated and bored. Was that supposed to frighten me? It was advice. Designed. Ethan's voice became quieter. Never threaten a man whose technology you don't understand. Charles narrowed his eyes. Victoria glanced toward Ethan. She knew that tone now. He had used it with Iftown. Richard. Question. Richard's financial structure. Charles apparently didn't. He smiled dismissively. Doesn't impress me. It will. Charles turned away. We're leaving. Victor looked at Jessica. Come. She didn't move. His face twisted. She shook her head. No. Excuse me? I said no. His anger after everything I've done for you. Jessica laughed bitterly. Patience. I gave you access to a life you never would have had. No. A tense and Nat. She looked toward Victor. You gave me shortcuts. Victor's face reddened. Charles interrupted, and Heberus South. Enough. Looked at him. Charles's tone was dismissive. My son has better things to do than argue with an employee. Slapped. Yesterday, she might have accepted the insult. Today, she understood exactly what the Harringtons thought of her. Prostraton, Av. Then your son should stop calling me. I laughed and stared at her. Jessica removed the diamond bracelet he had given her and placed it in his hand. Then she removed the necklace, the luxury show for it. He had insisted she carry. She placed everything together. Victor looked humiliated. I'll regret this. Jessica's eyes filled with tears. I already regret enough. Nobody stopped her. Charles watched her leave, then turned toward Victoria. And the keyless, reckless. Victoria's hand tightened around Ethan's. No. Fruss smiled. It's made me less patient. Charles looked at their joined hands. Enjoy the performance. Then he left with Victor. The moment the doors closed, the lobby exploded in whispers. Resounding a fee. We need a private room. He nodded. Jessica had disappeared into the elevator. For half a second, Ethan watched the numbers descend. Victoria noticed. Go after her. No. You defended her. I homing her back. Victoria studied him carefully. Good. Boss. Was that jealousy? No. Came far too quickly. Ethan smiled. Victoria immediately started walking. We have more important problems. Of course. Maya followed them into the executive conference room, Ronning and Lort. She connected Jessica's phone to an isolated system. Several messages appeared on the screen. Victor had been careless, had requested Ethan's family addresses, previous workplaces, financial history, former business partners. He had also sent a message stating that his father believed Helix had to be neutralized before the wedding. Victoria's expression darkened. Neutralized. Maya nodded. Could mean commercially. Bow. Ethan leaned against the table. Any direct threat? Home and Sal. Mayasa opened another thread. This is more interesting. Sualau forwarded Jessica. A screenshot from an internal Harrington Capital conversation. One name appeared repeatedly. Richard Sinclair. Bidare froze. Ethan stepped closer. Your uncle is working with the Harringtons. Wasim Talon. Ass. The conversation referenced a joint strategy meeting. Asset, pressure, patent, challenges, investor destabilization, and something called Operation Glass Crown. Frusta became unreadable. Ethan looked at her. You recognize it. She didn't answer immediately. No lies. Victoria closed her eyes for a moment, then spoke. Glass Crown was the internal name of a contingency plan designed years ago. For what? Removing me. Maya looked surprised. Even she hadn't known. Uncle created it when Elatsium's CEO. The plan required pressure from multiple directions at once. Litigation. Executive resignations. Ethan understood. An avalanche. Victoria nodded. I simultaneously. Even a strong company can look unsalvageable. Maya folded her arms. Richard couldn't execute it alone. Victoria looked at the Harrington messages. Now he doesn't have to. Ethan asked, what does Charles gain? Ardent. Victoria's answer was immediate. Richard wants control. Charles wants pieces. Maya said. They could divide the company after forcing a restructuring. Ethan looked at the screen. And Helix. Victoria's jaw tightened. Without Ardent as a strategic partner, they assume Helix becomes vulnerable. Faintly. That's their second mistake. Victoria looked at him. Second? First was assuming you are Ardent's only defense. He walked toward the display. Synchronized. Yes. So, synchronization is the weakness. South, Ostu. If one participant breaks early, the others reveal themselves while trying to compensate. Ethan nodded. What are you proposing? Maya shook her head. That's dangerous. All in lost. Right. Ethan pointed at the names on the screen. They believe they have surprise. Heir. Victoria's eyes narrowed. You want to bait them. I want them committed. If we miscalculate, thousands of employees could be affected. I know. Became serious. So we don't gamble with Ardent. He tapped Helix's interface. Victoria Hasnate. Victoria blinked. A what? A live predictive model of Yorth. Ethan's voice sharpened with the confidence of a man finally standing on his own battlefield. Cash flow, supplier dependencies, debt exposure, contracts, customer concentration, CEST. Legal risk, closer. Helix can model that? Helix can model Moria. Give me access to Ardent's operational data and 48 hours. Haas. For what? To predict Crown before they execute it. Victoria stared at him. For South. Mattered? Can you do it? Ethan smiled. Pattern destroy a company using patterns. He looked at the Helix screen. Patterns are what I built this thing to hunt. Rasaumsid and Tamsaus. 2 days is, a secured server room, beneath became the center of a silent war. Helix consumed years of corporate history, supplier contracts, loan structures, legal disputes, executive communications, out and south. Victoria remained beside Ethan for most of the first night. By 3 in the morning, she had removed her jacket and abandoned her heels beneath the desk. And then Sal. So can you? I'm working. So am I. You're watching me work. Very executive. Victoria almost smiled. Hours passed. Something between them changed in that room. Without cameras, board members, or family politics, Victoria seemed younger, verstaused, less untouchable. In a chair, a financial tale report rested against her chest. Rest, he quietly took off his over her. Her eyes opened. I'm not asleep. I was thinking. Very intensely, down and high. For a moment, neither spoke. Victorious Law. Why did you agree to marry me? Ethan turned back toward the monitor. You needed help. Still not enough. Sass. I'm Inari. Ethan looked at her. Victoria continued. You could have partnered with Ardent without marriage. Dal. She had known that. She had known that too. Tori smiled, faintly. You don't have an answer. Give me one. Ethan studied her. Helen and DeSalle, chores. Ispazischwert what Helixie was worth. They looked at the technology differently. And me? You looked at me differently. as expression softened. Ethan continued. You asked why I hid what I could do. Paused. Nobody else asked. Victoria Sinclair had no clever response. Then Helix sounded in. Both turned toward the screen. A network of predicted events appeared. Patent downgrade and credit downgrade pressure. Den, anonymous, executive poaching. Short positions against ardent-linked securities. Everything converged within the same 72-hour window. Maya rushed inside. What happened? Ethan's face hardened. Victoria stepped closer to the display. The projected was worse than she had imagined. Then another alert appeared. Helix identified a hidden variable liner. One internal executive had been communicating indirectly with Richard Sinclair. Victoria stared at the name. Her face lost color. Maya whispered, "That's impossible." Ethan looked at Victoria. She didn't move. Anonymous Sal. The trader. Not a regional director. Not someone Richard had recently recruited. Ardent Technologies. Chief Financial Officer. Victoria's oldest corporate ally. The man who had helped her save the company. And according to Helix, he had been feeding Richard Sinclair confidential information for almost 3 years. Victoria stared at the evidence, crasting mouth. Then another message appeared. A transaction had already been authorized from Daniel's executive credentials. Tomorrow morning, nearly $2 billion in ardent liquidity would be moved into accounts exposed to an engineered banking freeze. Less than 9 hours remained. If Victoria whispered, if that transfer settles, glass crown begins. Ethan stood. Prusumston lost. No, glass crown has already begun. At 6 in the morning. Ardent Technologies looked perfectly normal. Employees had not yet arrived. The lobby lights glowed softly, cleaning empty corridors. Coffee machines hummed. Outside, traffic was beginning to fill the streets. Dunchaumius and team surface, nearly two preparing to vanish. Victoria stood motionless in front of the Helix display. Daniel Mercer, Townsheriff, her chief financial officer, her mentor, the man who had stood beside her when banks refused to lend Ardent another dollar. Board members, twice her age. The man she had trusted with every financial artery in the company. 3 years for pound lost. Helix, estimate had been communicating with Richard Sinclair for 3 years. Victoria's voice was barely audible. There has to be another explanation. Thrust down and lost. Ethan wanted there to be one. Not because Daniel mattered to him, Karna, because Victoria did. Told him this betrayal had gone far beyond business. Maya slowly shook her head. I morsi comme sals. Victoria turned. Credentials can be stolen, the access history. But biometric confirmation was used. Von Ladel to show for it. Ethan said nothing. Helix had reconstructed the sequence. Frashid and Townend Loth. He approved a liquidity transfer through 3 intermediate treasury accounts. Those funds were scheduled to settle shortly after markets opened, being wits in Larnet. But Glass Crown had been designed around timing. Once the money entered the exposed accounts, anonymous regulatory complaints would trigger temporary restrictions. At almost the same moment, Rust, 2 major suppliers were expected to suspend delivery. A patent infringement lawsuit would become public. Short sellers would amplify rumors that Ardent faced hidden solvency problems and loss. Then, lenders would activate protective clauses. Rain. Solvent. But for several terrifying hours, it would look as if it weren't. That was all Richard needed. Panic. Markets didn't require truth to collapse, only uncertainty. Victoria finally spoke. Can we stop the transfer? Maya answered. Ethan shook his head. Not yet. Victorian dollars is moving. I know. Then why are we waiting? Because Daniel isn't the final piece. Ethan, Ethan pointed toward the screen simultaneously. If we stop the transfer now, they'll know we've discovered the operation. And, for San, Maya understood first. And we lose the network. Loss. Richard survives. Charles survives. Hossett, whoever else is involved, survives. 6 months from now, they try again differently. Victoria looked at the countdown. Proceed. So, we let the transfer proceed? No. Step toward the control terminal. We make them believe it does. Victoria studied him. Awesome stand. Soused. Helix already modeled the receiving structures. He opened a financial map, Myhon and Lai, to move into 3 treasury accounts. Correct. We duplicate the reporting trail. Maya's eye settlement. Ethan nodded. Loss. Internally, every compromised observer sees confirmation that the transfer succeeded. Victoria began to understand. But the real money remains secured. Maya added, we feed them a false liquidity crisis. Ethan smiled faintly and activates. Victoria stared at the map. It was reckless. The Shend of Indy reject. She would normally reject. Souse. 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 But this was no longer a normal corporate battle. Do it. Maya looked at her. Victoria. Ethan held her gaze. Publicly. They attack. Thrice before we reveal anything. I know. I know. Media will say you've lost control. Farsome Forient. They've been saying that since I was 22. Ethan almost smiled. Her step beside him. She started the simulation. For the next 2 hours, Helix constructed the illusion. False settlement confirmations. Mirrored treasury records. Synthetic account responses. Our scenes is symptomat. Rusting adder. Crust had T-polar, the channels, loth. Daniel's compromised access could observes. Nothing left Arden's protect reserves. But anyone monitoring through Richard's network would believe the company had just exposed nearly $2 billion. A town, a toast. At 8:17, the first signal arrived. An encrypted message was detected leaving Daniel Mercer's office account. Only 3 words. Maya stared at successfully. Transfer completed the CEF string, so it's confirmed, and locked and fastens. Victorious became unreadable. Then, another message arrived from an external device. Lost. Ethan's eyes sharpened. There, had closed. At 8:30, Daniel Mercer entered the executive floor. He carried coffee. At Victoria. You're here early. Victoria looked at the man she had trusted for 12 years. For us sales. After she would expose him immediately. Instead, she smiled. Smiled. So are you. Glanced toward Ethan. Big day? Ethan answered casually. And lost. Daniel placed several reports on the conference table. We may have an issue with treasury liquidity later this morning. I'm moaning pressure. What kind of issue? Routine settlement pressure. Buy. Soust. Nothing serious. Public announcements. Ethan almost admired the performance. Victoria asked, including the Helix partnership, especially that. There it was, not isolation. Isolation, say. He wanted Helix separated from Ardent before the attack became visible. Down. Why? Why? Markets are sensitive. Today could be unusually volatile. Victoria looked at him. For 1 second their eyes locked. For Sand South. Locked. As he sensed something. Perhaps after 12 years, some instinct warned him that Victoria's calmness was wrong. Then Maya entered. Daniers. He frowned. Now, thou. Once more at Victoria. Then left. Tonin South. The moment the door closed, Victoria released the breath she had been holding. Ethan watched her. You handled that well. Hi. I wanted to ask him why. Later, lost. Do you all when someone's life is collapsing? No. She stared at him. Then why now? Ethan moved closer. Because if I lose control, you have to carry both of us. Something in Victoria's expression shifted. Before she could answer, every monitor in the room flashed red. Maya looked at her phone, appeared online. Ardent Technologies faces emergency patent lawsuit over core automation systems. Rasikan Sal's. 30 seconds later, another headline appeared. Two major suppliers suspend shipments amid contract dispute. Then another. Anonymous. Anonymous source. Question. After unusual treasury movements. Markets opened. Ardent shares dropped immediately. 5. 7. Frustrates began calling. Employees filled internal channels with questions. Reporters surrounded the building. All Victoria's phone lines exploded with messages from board members. One demanded an emergency meeting. Another asked whether she had lost access to the treasury accounts. Alas. Investors were preparing to sell. Then Charles Harrington appeared on financial television. Ethan watched the broadcast silently. Charles wore a grave expression. He claimed Harrington Capital had longstanding concerns about Ardent's increasingly aggressive leadership and suggested that shareholders deserved stronger oversight. He never accused Victoria directly. He didn't need to. The implication was enough. Maya muttered, "He rehearsed this." Mathan nodded. "Of course." Then Richard Sinclair appeared in a separate interview. I spoke and family member. He praised Victoria's intelligence, praised her ambition, and Autolaseo. That growth had perhaps outpaced discipline. Victoria watched without expression. Richard finished with the sentence Ethan knew had been carefully prepared. I home sound. Sounds. Sometimes when to let more experienced hands help. Victoria turned off the screen. Now he's enjoying himself. The Helix of model. No. She looked at him. He's waiting. For what? Ethan enlarged the probability tree. Unchanged. Of course. I lost ground. Merely to damaged Ardent. It was designed to make the board remove Victoria voluntarily. The phone rang. Her general counsels sounded breathless. Emergency. Board session. Dull and in loss briefly. Victoria closed her eyes. Who called it? Daniel. Silence, then she said, I'll attend. The call ended. The call ended. They're going to suspend her. Victoria stood. Let them try. 30 minutes later, the Ardent boardroom was full. All. Some directors joined remotely. Others had arrived in person. Daniel Mercer sat near the center. Professional. Loyal. Agenda town. Richard Sinclair appeared on one of the remote screens as a major trust representative. Charles Harrington was not officially present, but everyone knew his influence hovered over the meeting. Her. Several directors looked Ethan surprised. Daniel spoke first, holding a ski. Victoria sat down. Ethan stays. One director objected. He's not a board member. Victoria replied calmly. Neither is Richard. Richard smiled from the screen. Technically, I'm here as a trust representative. Ethan sat beside Victoria. Then, technically, I'm here as her fiancé. Several directors exchanged looks. Richard laughed, and I like him more every tan. Daniel presented the crisis. Plier disruptions. Liquidity uncertainty. Every problem had evidence. Ax, X, axis. And in this down in Sowen, Sal. Every risk appeared real. Then came the recommendation. For the stability of Ardent Technologies, I believe executive authority should temporarily transfer to an emergency committee while the board reviews these events. Victoria stared at him. Daniel avoided her eyes. Stast, who would lead the committee? Vite answered. I would be willing to serve. There it was. Glass crown. Victoria looked around the table. Some directors were frightened, are given time it. Others already compromised. Several genuinely believed the company was collapsing. Richard's expression remained compassionate. Pies. Victoria, no one is questioning your accomplishments. Ethan almost laughed. Richard continued. I lost in the oil. But shareholders cannot ignore today's events. Victoria leaned back. You've been waiting 12 years to say this. He smiled. I've been waiting 12 years for you to understand it. Daniel lowered his eyes. The board Sinclair at the emergency resolution. Temporary suspension of Victoria Sinclair's executive authority. Transfer of operational oversight. All with loss of the Helix partnership. That last line told Ethan everything. Richard didn't only want Ardent. He wanted Helix Basane his victory. Victoria turned toward Ethan. Quietly, she asked. Ready? He looked at the Helix dashboard on his tablet. More participants had activated. Law firms, ascent selling accounts. 2 compromised suppliers. 3 shell companies. Linked indirectly to Harrington Capital. Network had revealed itself. Frasset. Ethan smiled. Now, Vitorum became silent. Before the board votes, I have one disclosure. Anaya. Richard's smile weakened. Victoria pressed a button. Pressing it and pressing it. In the boardroom changed. The supposed treasury crisis disappeared. Real account balances appeared. Fully liquid, fully accessible. Untouched. Daniel's face turned white. One director leaned forward. What is this? My Hestel made it. Lost. The $2 billion Mr. Mercer claims is inaccessible, never left protected custody. For Senhand. That's impossible. Ethan finally spoke. Holson hounded. No. What you saw was a simulated settlement. Daniels and mouth slightly. Richard stopped smiling. Ethan continued. Wasau for sows. For the last several hours, Helix has been feeding false confirmation data into channels we already knew were compromised. The next screen appeared. A map of communications. I have Mercer, Richard Sinclair, Harrington linked intermediaries, by representatives, litigation coordinators, financial accounts, every connection illuminated. A director whispered, my God. Victoria looked at Daniel. Had ever heard it. Her voice was colder than Ethan to a crisis. She paused. Nat, honest, some stood abruptly. Victoria, listen to me. No. His face broke. For the first time, the polished executive disappeared. Richard forced me. Richard snapped. Be careful. Daniel turned toward the screen. At home day. Protection. The boardroom erupted. Richard's expression became murderous. Watched quietly. One participant had broken. Exactly as predicted. Basham was shouting. Now, he had evidence, almost against my son. He said he'd send everything to prosecutors unless I cooperated. All with Victoria's expression changed. What evidence? Daniel's shoulders collapsed. Paul and a sow. 3 years ago. Richard said coldly, this meeting is becoming absurd. Ethan tapped the screen. Nodder. Absurd. He looked at Richard. Convenient. Lost. Helix had already reconstructed the relevant transactions. Daniel's son had committed fraud. Einer stout. But Richard hadn't merely discovered it. A company, linked to Richard, had quietly helped route the stolen funds. Maya's voice came through the conference system. My Hondas sales. Richard's face froze. Ethan continued. You didn't blackmail Ram, you discovered. The evidence expanded. You helped create the crime. The room went silent. Daniel stared at Richard. What? Frustras. Richard said nothing. Ethan looked directly at him. You needed leverage over Ardent's chief financial officer, Honor. Son, Sao, to steal money. Then preserve the evidence. Daniel sank into his chair. The betrayal was complete. Disconnect from the meeting. Maya locked the conference feed. You should stay. Richard's idzinge remained on the screen. His face was no longer pleasant. Victoria stood at the head of the table. Richard Sinclair. Your authority on the family trust is suspended pending legal review. He laughed. You don't have that power. Damn souse. But they do. Raised his hand. Then another. Then another. The emergency resolution changed. Not to remove Victoria. To authorize immediate investigation of Richard Sinclair, Daniel Mercer, and all related counterparties. Within minutes thus passed. Crown shattered. Outside the headquarters, markets began reversing. Ardent, suspicious, fine intact. Suppliers who had coordinated the attack were placed under legal notice. The patent lawsuit was challenged with documentation showing suspicious financing. Short sellers began covering positions. Ardent shares recovered, then rose, fertile in loss. And Sastows then surged. As Victoria's destruction became one of the most spectacular failed corporate attacks in recent memory. Jessica watched everything from a small conference room downstairs. Investigators accessed to Victor's messages. When the news broke that the Harrington network had been implicated, she closed her eyes. A week ago, Victor had looked like power, all she understood as. Real power wasn't inherited access. It was surviving when everyone wanted you broken. Her phone buzzed. Unknown number, she answered. Victor's voice came through. We need to meet. Jessica immediately stood. I'm done listening. My father. That's your problem. You think Ethan won? Isn't silent. Victor laughed bitterly. This isn't over. What are you talking about? My father has something Richard doesn't. Jessica's stomach tightened. Victor lowered his voice. Proof that Ethan Cole stole Helix. Boss froze. That's impossible. Is it? Re-ended the call. Across the city, Ethan and Victoria finally left the boardroom. For the first time all day, they were alone. A bolt-feed dermostat. Victoria, adrenaline leaned against, disappeared. Her hands began shaking. Warren. He took them in his. She looked down. Everything. No, Daniel. I know. 12 years. Howell cracked for the first times. Ethan stepped closer. Victoria looked away. I hate it. That betrayal still surprises me. Thought about Jessica. Sass. 4 years. The ballroom. The ring sinking into champagne. Maybe it should. Victoria looked at him. I less in Norden Norris. Betrayals. You've probably stopped trusting anyone. For several seconds, she simply stared at him. Then she stepped forward and rested her forehead against his chest. Wasn't in the contract. No cameras. No board. No reason to perform. Slowly, he wrapped his arms around her. Victoria, anything. I wasn't going to. Good. For Sass. Until Maya entered. She stopped, then immediately turned around and asked. Maya, with a completely neutral expression. We have another problem. Ethan almost laughed. Maya handed him a tablet. A press release had appeared online minutes earlier. From in the South, Prath. How? Harrington Capital accused Helix Foundry theft. The article claimed Ethan had stolen the core architecture from a deceased engineer named Alexander Cole. Ethan stopped breathing. Boston. You know that name? Ethan stared at the screen. Alexander Cole. His father. The man everyone believed had spent his career as an ordinary systems engineer. The man who had supposedly died in an accident 11 years earlier. Maya continued. Harrington claims they own the original patents through an acquisition made before his death. Granges. Is any of that true? Ethan didn't answer. His face had phone rail. Then his phone rang, his mother. He answered instantly. Mom? Her voice was shaking. In the centre. Ethan, someone broke in straighter. Are you hurt? I Costin. No. She was silent for several seconds. I sensed apta south, then whispered. Ethan's blood turned cold. I notebooks he had never fully understood as a teenager. Fragments of algorithms, architectural sketches. Hendis inspired the earliest version of Helix. Victoria watched his expression. Ethan? He lowered the phone. Genuine fear appeared in his eyes. Because if Charles Harrington possessed what Ethan now suspected he possessed, the attack wasn't simply about stealing Helix. Loth. Death might never have been an accident. Ethan reached his mother's house less than 40 minutes later. Victoria came with him, headed south. So did Maya. Police vehicles were already parked outside. The front door had been forced open, but almost nothing inside had been touched. And Helix aware, cash. Untouched, cash untouched. Only one thing was missing. Research box. Ethan's mother sat at the kitchen table, wrapped in a blanket. She stood immediately. Ethan. He crossed the room and hugged her, of the tension leave his body. You're sure you're okay? I'm fine. Did you see anyone? No. I went downstairs because I heard glass. Frustrations. Mrs. Cole looked at her. Then's surprise. You must be Victoria. Victoria, who could silence a boardroom with one glance, suddenly looked almost uncertain. Yes, ma'am. Ethan's mother looked at their hands, at the engagement ring. Despite everything, she smiled faintly. So this is the woman. Mom. What? Frashed and Loth. I'm allowed with normal sentence today. Victoria actually laughed. The sound lasted only a moment. From saying Hapstren became serious. They knew exactly what they wanted. Homa Samar loss. And Tamer, tell me about Dad's box. You know most of it. He shook his head. I know what you told me when I was 17. On the show for it. His mother's answer enough. Victoria remained silent. Ethan leaned forward. His mother looked at him strangely. Long story. Then his expression hardened again. I had really just a systems engineer? She closed her eyes. No. Or Sasses. What was he? A researcher. Harrington Ann. Applied systems. Apple, Ethan, and Loss. Looked toward Maya. Maya immediately began searching through her tablet. Mrs. Cole continued. Your father worked there before Harrington Capital became what it is today. Private Technology Division. Ethan's voice became quiet. What were they building? Hunsider Sange. His pulse changed. Victoria saw it. Continued. Your father used to say conventional systems only reacted to information, homes, and laws. Patterns before people understood what they meant. Helix. The earliest idea behind Helix. Phi. Ethan stared at the table. Why didn't you tell me? Because your father made me promise. Graduate and afraid. Her voice trembled. That technology for ordinary business. Victoria Hazat asked, what did he want? Mrs. Cole looked at her. Cest, control. She explained that Harrington Applied Systems had begun using early predictive models to identify companies under financial stress. Engine Sarpan non. Politicians facing hidden scandals. Competitors likely to collapse under specific pressure. Bonlon on the Pawson. He was building decision software. Charles saw something else. A weapon. Objected. He secretly copied his research notes and prepared to leave. 3 weeks later, his car went off a mountain road. Police called it an accident. Mrs. Cole accepted that explanation because she had been terrified and alone. A Harrington lawyer appeared at this house. He asked for Alexander's notebooks. Ethan's jaw tightened. I told him they had burned in the accident. Maya looked up. They hadn't. Mrs. Cole shook her head. The box, all with mothered in the sows, apt, cross. the table, and grabbed his hand. I never wanted you involved in any of this. Ethan stared at her. But I was. She looked confused. I know. Ethan froze. For smiled sadly. You thought I didn't recognize his handwriting on your desk? For years, Ethan had believed Helix was his independent creation. He had written the modern architecture, designed the adaptive engine, built the machine learning framework. But the philosophical foundation had come from those notebooks. Alexander's unfinished ideas had shaped the questions Ethan chose to solve, all unanimous. Charles Harrington's accusation suddenly became dangerous. Because Charles might own Alexander's employment-era intellectual property, crouched beside him. Look at me, Ethan did, piehead. No. Any source material. There was no usable code. Mostly equations, architecture concepts, handwritten theories. Then Helix is still yours, Frashalaner. Maya looked up from her tablet. I found the old subsidiary. Harrington Applied Systems dissolved 10 years ago. Victoria asked. Patent transfers? Went to Harrington Capital. Ethan closed his eyes, briefly. There it was, home capable of reaching him. Then Maya continued. But something is strange. Die. What? Alexander Cole filed 3 patent applications personally. They were never assigned to Harrington. Victoria stepped closer. I'll show for it. Why? Maya scrolled. Because the applications were abandoned after his death. By. But Charles is claiming ownership. Which means he may be bluffing. Ethan stood. Everyone looked at him. If he stole the box today, he's not bluffing. Victoria frowned. Then what is he looking for? Ethan suddenly remembered something. A sentence his father had written repeatedly in one notebook. Ownership follows origin, only when origin can be proved. He looked at his mother and nodded. She hesitated. Then, a recorder. Ethan's heart pounded. What kind? And lost. Your father used it for notes. Did you ever listen to it? Crast was already moving. If Charles has it, we need to assume it contains evidence. Expression sharpened. Evidence against whom? Ethan answered. Paston. Everyone. By afternoon, Harrington Capital held a press conference. Charles Harrington stood before dozens of reporters. Sound south. Sal. He looked pale but triumphant. Charles announced that his company possessed historical documentation, proving that core concepts behind Helix had originated inside Harrington Applied Systems. INSI. A billion-dollar platform using stolen intellectual property. Reporters exploded with questions. Then Charles delivered the real attack by Helm Sals in Nuston Town Na. Harrington Capital, file date, trading partners, immediately hesitated. 2 potential investors paused negotiations. Technology, media, filled with speculation. Jessica watched the broadcast from her apartment. She had resigned from Ardent that morning, not because she needed to rebuild without shortcuts. When Victor appeared beside his father, she felt nothing anymore. Attraction, no ember, no envy. Only embarrassment that she had once believed standing beside him meant she had moved upward in life. Phone vibrated. Ethan. She stared at the name. I need your house. Hello? I need your help. Law South. Jessica stood immediately. What happened? Did Victor ever mention an old Harrington storage facility? Hannard, she thought. Then remembered. Months earlier, Victor had complained about accompanying his father to a private archive outside the city, in South. He mentioned one. Where? Allocation. Then added, why? Ethan's voice turned cold. My cousin, where? I think they took my father's box. Within an hour, Maya verified the property. Former Harrington Applied Systems campus. Officially, Enderdal. privately maintained, but Ethan didn't storm the building. Buys Ireland Acom soused. Traffic cameras available through legal commercial datasets and logistics activity. A Harrington vehicle had entered the property shortly after the burglary, then another. Charles was there, so was Victor. Eyed and when Ethan. We call the police. We do. Front sand and calm. Again. We make sure they don't destroy what they stole before police arrive. Holmes smiled faint. Now you sound like Victoria. Victoria looked offended. A compliment. Police obtained a search warrant based on the burglary evidence, vehicles, records, and Jessica's statement. By evening, officers entered the old campus. Helm tasked, and then lost. Charles Harrington panicked immediately. The box was found in a secure archive room, Hassan the Townie. So was the recorder. But wasn't Alexander's research. It was the archive itself, by the lost. Records. Private investigations. Competitor. Vulnerability reports. Political pressure files. Blackmail material. Predictive targeting documents. The exact machinery Alexander had feared. Charles had preserved everything because men obsessed with leverage rarely destroyed useful weapons. Maya called Ethan from outside the building. Yes. Paused. You need to hear it. Romaldi Samsrast. Hours later, Ethan sat inside a private evidence room with Victoria beside him. The recording crackled. Then his father's voice filled the speakers. Tired. Tired. Afraid. By Charles's plan. He documented orders to manipulate companies using predictive intelligence. He named executives by Hound and Souse. Then came the final recording, and a town in the Loth. To federal investigators the next morning, he never arrived. Ethan's hands tightened. Alexander something that broke him. If Ethan ever hears this, I'm sorry. Ethan stopped breathing. His father's voice continued. I wanted to build something that could help people see danger before it arrived. If my son ever continues this work, I hope he builds it better than I did. My homete and sin loss. Victoria slowly reached Ethan's hand. Alexander's final words came softly. And I hope he never lets powerful men convince him that intelligence belongs only to those rich enough to buy it. The recording ended. Ethan stared at the dark screen. He didn't speak, but Victoria didn't force him to. She simply stayed. The legal collapse of Harrington Capital began almost immediately. Authorities opened investigations into corporate coercion, unlawful surveillance manipulation, obstruction, and possible evidence connected to Alexander Cole's death. Charles Harrington resigned within days. Victor disappeared from public view after being named in several related inquiries by Norbeed and Hounded Prespreft. Glass Crown lost his remaining family authority. Daniel Mercer cooperated with investigators in exchange for consideration regarding his role. Ardent survived. All with little de Shunwit, Helix survived, and when independent patent experts reviewed Alexander's work, they confirmed what Victoria had believed. Helix was Ethan's, pioneer. But Ethan's architecture, implementation, adaptive engine, and technical breakthroughs were his own. Months later, Ardent and Helix completed their partnership, Ras Sasaufa. The valuation that once seemed unbelievable became outdated almost immediately. Ethan's company expanded internationally. But the biggest change wasn't financial, personal. One evening, Jessica asked to meet him. They sat in a quiet cafe, and no Victoria. No audience. Calmer. Why so? Ethan said nothing. She continued. I kept telling myself about my future. Her eyes lowered. But I was greedy. I bought Pouncy's tie, being ordinary. Tears filled her eyes. He continued. You thought money could protect you from that. Jessica smiled sadly. Fra South. Maybe. Understood myself. Do you hate me? Then shook his head. No. Head and try and laugh. Because hatred still meant attachment. He had moved beyond it. Jessica wiped her eyes. Do you love her? Ethan looked out the window. Frustrated. Victoria was across the street, pretending not to wait for him while obviously waiting for him. He smiled. Jessica followed his gaze. Ethan stood. That's a yes. And whores, Jessica. She nodded. No shortcuts. Posturate. He left. Victoria immediately looked at him. How was it? Should I be jealous? I don't. I thought you didn't get jealous. I don't. Of course. They walked had passed since Victoria originally proposed a contractual marriage and locked. Her birthday was tomorrow. The trust condition would be satisfied once they married. That evening, Victoria placed the original agreement on the table. Our contract. Ethan looked at it. Very romantic. We can turn a year. I remember. Victoria stared at the pages. Ethan the McCann. Sanal. Again. Disassinathine. What happened to efficiency? I changed the terms. You can't change a contract unilaterally. I'm the CEO. That explains a lot. Head clower. Her confidence suddenly faltered. For the first time, Ethan saw nervousness in her eyes. I'm family tasked. No family trust. No revenge. Marry me because you want to. I honed Fang. Ethan looked at her. The woman who had once offered marriage like a merger now looked terrified of hearing his answer. So he let the silence stretch. Naren lies. He smiled. A panting sound is time it. Yes. He pulled a ring from his pocket. Victoria froze. This one wasn't part of her arrangement. Wasn't selected by lawyers. Prepared for cameras. Ethan had chosen it himself. He took her hand. Victoria's eyes began to shine. You asked first, but your proposal was terrible. She almost laughed. I'm fixing it. He slid the ring onto her finger. Marry me. All the steam and soused. For several seconds. Then wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him before answering. When she finally pulled away, Ethan smiled. Don't ruin it. Their wedding took place. Quietly. Also no corporate spectacle. No strategic partners controlling the guest list. Pairing Nas. Maya pretended she didn't. Jessica sent flowers, but didn't attend. When Victoria walked toward Ethan, he remembered the ballroom months earlier, the velvet ring box. Jessica beside Victor, and lost Tal. Lost. The moment he thought, 4 years of his life had become meaningless. He understood now that losing the wrong person had not destroyed his future. Tone cleared and had cleared the space for the right one to enter it. After the ceremony, I stood beside him, overlooking the city. Do you ever think about that night? Regret it? Ethan shook his head. If Jessica hadn't dumped me, I might never have met the real you. Victoria smiled. You would have met me eventually. I was going to your company. You mean try. I would have succeeded. Lost. Absolutely not. You're my husband now. You're legally required to agree with me. It should be. Ethan laughed. The city glittered beneath them. Helix had become more than his father's unfinished dream. Ardent was stronger than ever. The men who little in the show Pret. Prasad and the Salmas, the men who ownership did some sales and had fallen because they never understood the simplest truth. Power wasn't the size of the inheritance. It wasn't the luxury car, rough the surname, the title, or the number attached to a bank account. Town power was building something nobody could take from you. Your skill, your principles, Einloft and her humiliation. Jessica had left Ethan because she believed he had nothing. Victor had mocked him because he believed Ethan lacked status. Charles had attacked him he believed genius. Could be owned. Richard had threatened him because he believed everyone had a price. Every one of them made the same mistake. Pasastel. They judged Ethan. Pasasath and lost. Pasas discovered what he was capable of. The man they had dismissed as ordinary was standing beside the most powerful woman in the room. Not beneath her, not behind her, beside her. Victoria rested her head against his shoulder. Mr. Sinclair. So, Ethan looked horrified. Dodd. She laughed. Ethan cold. Ready to go home? He took her hand. Timer. Yeah. Together, they walked away from the lights, the headlines, the billion-dollar wars, and every person who had tried to define their value for them. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan didn't need Helix to predict what came next. Assign Habes whatever happened. They would face it together.